From Washington, D.C., I'm Allister D'Souza. This is Washington Watch, a weekly roundup of the biggest stories from the United States and beyond.
There's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future. I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks. That's a quote directly from the president for all of you.
Allowing time for a diplomatic solution, U.S. President Donald Trump says he's giving himself 2 weeks to decide if the U.S. will attack Iran. Meanwhile, 8 days into the conflict, Israel and Iran continue to exchange fire as diplomatic talks between European officials and Iran take place in Geneva. Sources telling NDTV there is a possibility of the 2 black boxes in the Air India crash being sent overseas for examination. Possible locations: the United States, the UK or Singapore. Sources say one of the black boxes is visibly more damaged, and if not handled properly, it risks compromising the integrity of crucial data. Yet another breather for TikTok. US President Trump has given the short video app the further 90-day extension. TikTok's Chinese parent, ByteDance, needs to decide if it will sell itself to a US buyer or face a ban. Trump has given TikTok a deadline reprieve 3 times since January this year. Student visa interviews are back, but there's a condition: social media accounts cannot be private and must be set to public. Last month, the Trump administration stopped student visa appointments. Visa officers have been told to flag anti-Semitic and U.S. national security risks, a phrase that's been used for pro-Palestinian campus protesters in the past.
Well, I think there are 2 separate recessions that we should be prepared for.
In an exclusive interview, Nobel winner Daron Acemoglu says expect a US recession next year, followed by another after Trump's term ends in 2028. Iran and Israel continue with their aerial attacks with no signs of de-escalation. US President Donald Trump is allowing 2 weeks for diplomacy before deciding whether to launch a US strike on Iran. In Geneva, meanwhile, Europe is putting forward an offer, a comprehensive offer, it calls, to Iran to end hostilities. That deal, according to French President Emmanuel Macron, involves moving towards zero uranium enrichment. Meanwhile, not all is well in MAGA land, with the Iran conflict threatening to split Trump's voter base.
I mean, you don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do.
Will he? Won't he? US President Donald Trump is keeping the world on edge as tensions escalate in the Middle East, and it seems to have hit too close to home. As a deepening divide is shaking the core of Trump's once unified voter base, the Make America Great Again movement. The trigger, the brewing possibility of the US joining Israel's strikes against Iran's nuclear program, and the president's ambiguity over the matter. The MAGA rift erupted in public view this week, with US Senator Ted Cruz clashed with controversial media personality Tucker Carlson in a fierce interview over US military action in the Middle East, where the latter confronted the senator over his lack of knowledge of Iran, including its population figures. Leading figures of the Trump's MAGA fan club, including Carlson, former advisor Steve Bannon, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, are hitting out against the president, warning that an US intervention in the Middle East could destroy Trump's presidency, signaling betrayal of past promises to avoid American involvement in long-running foreign wars. But Trump's adamant.
Very simple. If they think that it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, then they should oppose me, but nobody thinks it's okay. People that I don't want to fight either. I'm not looking to fight. But if it's a choice between fighting and them having a nuclear weapon, you have to do what you have to do.
Trouble is brewing in Trump's inner circle. Reports suggest that President Trump has sidelined his star power-led national security team, including National Intelligence Chief Tulsi Gabbard and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, for a small group of experienced aides, including J.D. Vance, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, among others. Gabbard has already been iced out over her position on Iran's nuclear program.
You've always said that you don't believe Iran should be able to have a nuclear weapon, but how close do you personally think that they were to getting one? Because Tulsi Gabbard testified in March that the intelligence community said Iran wasn't building a nuclear weapon.
I don't care what she said. I think they were very close to having it.
Ghosts of Washington's failed interventions in Iraq and Libya haunt the Trump administration. But in 2003, George W. Bush justified his invasion of Iraq, citing intelligence findings. 22 years later, Trump's possible military intervention is not backed by any intel suggesting the Iranians are close to a nuclear bomb. Next 2 weeks will determine the future of Middle East and Trump administration as well. Disha Bakhchi's report for NDTV World.
Now, these are some satellite images that we're showing you of the strike by Israel on Iran. Those hostilities and attacks continue at this point in time after President Trump, though, allowing for some kind of breather room that allows for a 2-week decision for himself to decide if the U.S. will actually join in those strikes with Israel. And in latest news coming in right now, President Emmanuel Macron of France and his European countries are saying that they're prepared to put forward a comprehensive negotiation plan to put an end to hostilities in Iran. Now, foreign ministers from the UK, France, and Germany and the EU all meeting with Iran's foreign minister in Geneva. This is happening in a few hours from now, Friday afternoon, and we'll have more on that as we get those details. Let's get you more on this story now. We are joined by Nicholas Grossman at the University of Illinois. He is also author of a book called Drones and Terrorism. Nicholas, President Trump has helped somewhat diffuse immediate tensions with this 2-week window, but Iran says there will be no talks with the US unless Israel stops bombing. Israel dismissing that, saying that Iran is misleading the world, it's just a waste of time. How do you think things are going to play out?
Well, in 2 weeks is something that Trump has said for many years when he doesn't seem to really want to give an answer, perhaps know an answer, and is trying to string things along. So an example from the United States is all the way back in 2016 when he first ran for president. He said he would have this great healthcare plan that everybody would love, and he would release the details in 2 weeks. And he never did. Anytime he was asked about it, he said, "Oh, I'll just give you the details in 2 weeks." And it has been literally 10 years at this point since he first brought that up. So it is possible that this indicates that he doesn't really know what to do or doesn't necessarily want to get involved with military action and would like it to go away. But the problem is, this is not something that's going to go away. So if anybody thought that the United States was about to bomb Iran tomorrow, then and were worried about that, then they should feel relieved, because it looks pretty clearly like the United States is not about to do that right away. But as long as the fighting continues, there's still going to be this open question about Iran's nuclear program, its missile program, Israel's actions towards Iran, their relations with each other, not to mention all the larger Middle East issues. And so in 2 weeks, there's still going to be a lot of problems that will come up again for the U.S. to possibly get involved or not.
All right, Nicholas, at the heart of the attack on Iran are claims that Iran is extremely close to building nuclear weapons. People are likening the motive to what happened to Saddam Hussein in Iraq, where, of course, eventually no weapons of mass destruction were found. A sense of déjà vu for you. How do you read this?
Well, there are some important differences and some similarities. So I'd say the biggest difference is that Iraq did not have a nuclear program, and at least not an active one at the time, whereas Iran openly has an active nuclear program, things like enriching uranium domestically. And they have been multiple times criticized by the International Atomic Energy Agency via the UN for violating the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. So unlike with Iraq, there really is something there. That said, the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu, and Netanyahu specifically, has claimed that Iran is on the verge of having a bomb. And they've, for at this point, really years that they have made that claim. In fact, Netanyahu, you can see even going back to the 20th century, has made claims along those lines. And other intelligence agencies, including in the United States, have not drawn a similar conclusion. So the question of Iran's nuclear program is real, but the possibility that they were just on the verge of having a bomb is most likely not accurate. And if you parse those statements, what you would see is that the real accusation they were making was that Iran was close to having enough enriched uranium that if it then decided to make a bomb, it would have the fuel for it, but not that they were, say, about to have a nuclear test within days.
Okay, Nicholas, let's talk about regime change. Trump earlier in the week said of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, we are going to take him out, at least for now, basically saying that we won't kill him yet for now. Extremely disturbing remarks there. But if this were to happen, there are really no guarantees that the next supreme leader, right, will be different in any way.
Not at all. So first, there's the possibility if the Iranian government holds together but loses its leadership, and so we have a similar Islamic Republic system but with new leaders, they likely will not have different opinions. And in fact, after having just been attacked by Israel, they will probably be more interested in getting a nuclear weapon because they can see other examples such as North Korea, which has nuclear weapons, and the United States and its allies negotiate with North Korea, whereas Iraq did not have nuclear weapons, and the United States and allies attacked. And so Iran has learned from this, or from the Libya example also, where Gaddafi did not have nuclear weapons, and he got overthrown in part with attacks from Western powers. So they will likely go for it even more. On the other hand, if the regime collapses, as it seems like the Israeli government hopes, then there is no guarantee that there will be something better, certainly not something that's Israel-friendly or America-friendly that rises in its place, or there's a live possibility that if the government collapses, nothing rises in its place, and it is a situation of chaotic power vacuums for a while, and it took the United States and allies years to stabilize Iraq, with occupying it with well over 100,000 troops. And Iran has about twice the population of Iraq and about 3 times the area. So any attempt to try to occupy and pacify an Iranian country that is in chaos is likely to be extremely difficult.
And we'll be closely watching, and so will you. Thank you very much indeed, Nicholas Grossman there from the University of Illinois. In other news now, this week saw Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaking to US President Trump. Modi reiterated that Operation Sindoor was paused following a request from Pakistan and not due to mediation or an offer of trade concessions by the US. NDTV Profits, Rishabh Bhatnagar has more on what kind of impact all of this might have on the looming India-US trade deal.
Right, with regards to this constant back and forth that is happening between US and India as to who brokered this ceasefire between India and Pakistan last month, an aspect that is ignored is the fact that trade talks are on between India and the US. And what we're picking up is that trade talks will continue parallelly. There is a diplomatic relation that India and the US share that perhaps Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Donald Trump adhere to. But what we're seeing is that an active bilateral trade agreement is being negotiated with India's Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal helming it, and we are supposed to, we're constantly still in agreement with the fact that a first tranche or an early harvest of the India-US bilateral trade agreement is on track for July 9th. What we're also given to understand is that because there is the US sort of July 4th, their Independence Day, or the 4th of July, it is that week where we expect a lot of these trade agreements that the US is expected to announce, and that is also what India is targeting for, given that July 9th is the date where the 3-month tariff pause period ends. And so that is something that is being looked forward to. A trade deal is very much in the offing for India and the US, at least a first tranche, and then we'll have another tranche come up in the fall of 2025. That is by October this year, and then there'll be a third sort of a tranche that will be decided on a later date. So that is what we have currently on the India, US, Pakistan sort of trilateral agreement and the trilateral relationship that these three countries share.
In other news now, from Trump's trade policy to coming after the independence of the US central bank, our next guest is alarmed. Daron Acemoglu won the 2024 Nobel Prize in Economics in an exclusive interview with NDTV. Acemoglu says that the world needs to brace for 2 recessions. Here's our exclusive interview. Acemoglu, for joining us here on Washington Watch. Our first question here to you, really. Mr. Acemoglu, whatever happens in the United States has repercussions on the rest of the world. What do you see happening with the US economy in the long term and short term?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. I don't think we can know that yet, but I think there are 2 issues to really appreciate, especially from the point of view of India and other emerging economies. First of all, what happens in the United States has ramifications around the world, exactly like you said, but that includes domestic policy as well. A lot of the world is focusing on tariff policy because that's immediately relevant. But Trump's bigger agenda is to create an executive presidency with him at the top with few constraints and a lot of power concentrated in his hands. If that succeeds, that's a fundamental transformation of US institutions with a even huger transformation of US economy following. But once you also make this observation, you also see that the form of tariffs has specific significance. There is no economic theory, absolutely none, that would justify the form of tariffs that President Trump is imposing. But it makes sense if your point is to centralize power in your hands. Now he can make deals with India, with Bangladesh, with China, with the European Union. More importantly, he now has a big weapon in his negotiations against US companies. Apple now has to be much more subservient to Donald Trump because he can put tariffs on Apple's supply chain. So it's a power play more than anything else.
Right, Professor Acemoglu, given everything you've told us, what are the odds of a US recession?
Well, I think there are 2 separate recessions that we should be prepared for. One, imagine what would have happened if the US did not go into this tariff game. Trump would have again weakened US institutions, and that would have had an impact on the tech sector, on other innovations, on other businesses. And I think we could expect an instability perhaps 4 or 5 years time. So some of it after Trump, actually. But with the tariffs, he's actually bringing those much earlier. And he's creating a new source of instability, which will intersect with those institutional induced recessions. So we could see a recession, I think, next year if this tariff game continues. And if, as it seems likely, at some point a Trump-induced recession arrives, it will not be an American recession. It will be a global recession.
Okay, Professor Acemoglu, your research on why countries succeed or fail won you the Nobel Prize. In your book, Why Nations Fail, which you co-authored, you cited how democratic institutions are critical to a nation's success. You cited the US as a great example, but that was in your book over a decade ago. What do you make about the United States as a nation today?
Well, I think we wrote that book 15 years ago, and even there we did discuss that the path of US success has been much more uncertain. US institutions showed flexibility, but they had many weaknesses. That's a point that we actually emphasize further in a book that we wrote about 7 years ago, The Narrow Corridor. But even since the 6-year landmark that has happened over the now that we're seeing, huge changes have happened in US institutions. Their weaknesses have been pried open. both during the Biden presidency, but especially after Donald Trump has come to power. And for once, I think there is a real danger that the US republic, US democracy could collapse. Now, if we go back to Why Nations Fail, it's ironic that some of the lines that we wrote in that book with advice to emerging economies, such as India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, those in Latin America, now apply to the United States. The danger is really undermining inclusive institutions and failing to build the institutions for a new age that we require. And for the US, the problem is that the effects are going to be slow because people still have trust in US institutions. They are normalizing these changes. But once it comes, it's going to have really deep consequences.
Okay, let's zoom into one of those institutions, the independence of the US Central Bank. Trump is unhappy with the Fed chair. Trump, of course, remains unhappy about high interest rates. What would you say to those who agree with Trump that the Fed should in fact cut rates to prevent a fallout from those tariffs?
Well, I think it is true that there is going to be a lot of turbulence. And when that comes, it may well be that central banks around the world may need to stimulate the economy. And also the independence of the central bank, which is such an important bulwark of stability in the United States, requires that experts in the central bank make that decision, not politicians. Politicians calling for lower interest rates is something we had left behind. But of course, Trump is bringing the worst in the political system. And the argument that I have created this mess and this mess should be accommodated by lower interest rates is really very hypocritical.
Okay. Professor Acemoglu, before we let you go, this has been a question on the minds of many Indians. When you won the Nobel Prize a few months ago, you shared the news by posting an article from Pune News, which is not a mainstream news outlet from India. Why did you pick Pune News for your choice?
I don't remember. It must have been, I don't use Twitter very regularly. I must have seen it and something must have appealed and I must have retweeted it. But I don't actually remember. I'm sorry. I like, some of the comments and the things I see from Indian press. It's like rich, diverse country with an amazing history. So I'm sure I was taken by some aspect of it.
That exclusive interview with Daron Acemoglu, more can be found on our YouTube channel. Time now for some other news in brief. This week saw Democrat Brad Lander, who is running for New York City mayor, handcuffed as he was trying to escort a migrant whom immigration agents were seeking to arrest. A few days prior, Democratic Senator Alex Padilla was wrestled out of a room and then handcuffed after he tried to question U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem at a news conference. Names of Democratic Indian American Congressman Sri Thanedar and Raja Krishnamurthy were on a hit list recovered from a suspect in a recent shooting in Minnesota. A 57-year-old man has been arrested and charged for killing both Melissa Hortman, the top Democrat in the Minnesota House, and her husband. Time for Diaspora Connect now, where we bring you stories of overseas Indians. Today, we met a former IT worker who gave up her high-paying job to become a farmer, not just any farmer, but one that grows Indian vegetables like Karela and Desi Palak.
My name is Swati Gadam. I am a full-time farmer, and prior to that I was in technology for 15 years. Vegetables, we specialize in Indian vegetables. Bitter melon like Karela, bottle gourds, fenugreek, methi, Malabar spinach. This is sorrel, katta palak, also called chukkakura. Here we have some lamb squatters, also known as batua, and famous in North and South India. Here is some Indian cilantro. Smells really good and has like amazing flavors. I chose to grow Indian vegetables because I'm a vegetarian, and also there is a gap in the farmers market for the Indian vegetables. The transition from IT to farming started about 4 years ago when I was kind of discontent with my 9-to-5 job, and it didn't feel like it was making any impact. I wanted to work towards sustainability. The house and the property costed us 500,000, but then it costed us another more than 100K to build the infrastructures, fixing these sheds and the barn, and then the rundown chicken coops. We had to rebuild everything. The clientele I have is Desis, but like even Caucasians. The reaction from non-Desi customers, a lot of them are into the plant-based diet too, so they are exploring what else is out there.
Okay, come on out. Come on.
My husband is still in technology. He's working full-time in that, and he helps out in the farming maybe on the weekends.
I think I support my wife all the time. And it's kind of a double win for me. Like, I help my wife, I get my exercise, so double win for me.
And you get good food.
Yes.
In this farming venture, I made many mistakes. I was growing squash and peppers, and then we take it to the market, but we don't sell. That's when we realized our niche was Indian vegetables. It's hard to make profit the first 3 years. Hoping this year, 4th year, I'm going to make some profits. Compared to the IT salary versus the money I'm making now, it's considerably less, but farm is definitely my happy place. There are other benefits of this. It's health, community, and the impact is just very rewarding.
That's it for Washington Watch. Subscribe to NDTV's YouTube channel. I'm Allister D'Souza.